I'm Mariella Frostrup. I'm a journalist, author, broadcaster, and campaigner. I've done a myriad of things in my long career, but they include presenting a book program on Radio 4 for 20 years, writing the Observer's Agony Aunt column for 20 years, creating and producing a brand new show on a brand new radio station, Times Radio, which went on to become one of their top-rated programs. I've written for every newspaper and magazine in the country, I think, and also beyond our borders, quite a few pieces in the US and so on. It's hard to describe really, I suppose, in a nutshell, what I do, because one of the reasons that I decided to move from PR, music PR, which I did in my early 20s, was because broadcasting gave me the opportunity to sort of stick my hand into lots and lots of different pies, and maybe you could say I have a short attention span, but I like to think that I just have a lively interest in the world, and also I suppose in our capacity individually to make change just through small incremental steps that we make in our own lives and in our own careers. I think that unwittingly, I was always prepared for the world we live in now, which is a world where you can't expect to have one career that just goes on, starts at the bottom, rises in a vertical line, and then you retire and go and play golf. So because of the fact that I've always been interested in so many different things in terms of women's equality and changing the experience for women in the working world, but also in literature, because I'm an autodidact. I left school at 16 in Ireland after a difficult sort of family period, and took the ferry to London, well, to Holyhead actually, with my carrier bags, no money, a bit like Dick Whittington, and arrived at a squat in West London on a sunny May morning, and very much, built everything myself since then. So I suppose you don't hear the phrase very often, but I could be described as a self-made woman, because everything has been very much on the back of me taking opportunities when they presented themselves and turning them into something, whether it was the music PR. My father was a journalist. He was the foreign editor of the Irish Times, so I really had a deep-rooted desire to work in journalism. That was one of my first ambitions, and working in PR then turned into writing a column for the Sunday Times. Then I started presenting TV shows because of the fact that I worked in the music business. My first show was called Big World on Channel 4, and it was actually just a glorious kind of fiesta of world music, which no one had really dipped into at that time. We had musicians from, all kinds of far-flung places playing music that lots of people hadn't had the chance to listen to before, and that was amazing to do as well. I grew up in Ireland in the 1970s, and as a girl, not very much was expected of you. You was expected to get a job and maybe work a little bit, but then, you would marry someone and they would take over looking after everything, and that would be the sort of end of it in a way. And my mother was very active in the feminist movement in Ireland at the time, but she was very much of her time. There seemed to be a lot of women talking about women's rights, but not actually in a position to live independent lives and support themselves. And so all the way through my career, I've been really interested in how you change the dynamic for women. We are a relative new entry into the working world. We only really, I suppose we've worked for millennia for nothing, and done all the unpaid work. But actually in the workplace, you could date it back to the end of the Second World War. And there's so much that needs to change in order to facilitate our presence, our skill set, and most importantly, I think in many ways, our biology, because from the minute we hit puberty, women are to an extent penalized for their biology. There's still a 14.9% pay gap, which we're all very conscious of. But there's also the fact that by the time you get to pension age, you'll have 20 to 30% less pension than your male contemporary because of the fact that you've probably taken time out during your working career to raise children. There's the fact that you end up with a much bigger pay gap if you're a working mother, because again, you need the flexibility to be able to do the other thing that women are expected to do, which is caring. 68% of caring in the UK is done by women, and I think that actually only increases in many other parts of the world. So the idea that we can just fine-tune things in order to make the working world a fair and equitable place for women, I think is a misnomer. We actually have to start from rock bottom and create perhaps a more curvy career path and the space in which that can evolve, because obviously, for reasons that I don't blame men for at all, but because it's been a system created by men, there's a very linear idea of what a career looks like. And for most women, that just isn't the reality, and that's what we need to really look at. My interest in women's health and how it impacts on our working lives really started when I entered perimenopause myself, and found myself, despite having been, a kind of rabid women's rights activist all the way through my working career, discovered I'd entered this black hole, this period where I didn't understand what was happening to me. For me, the symptoms were anxiety, insomnia. I suddenly started thinking I was losing my mind because I couldn't remember anything. Obviously, when you're not sleeping, that doesn't help. And so I dug deep into menopause. I made a documentary for the BBC. I wrote a book, Cracking the Menopause, just to find out, first of all, why this period of women's lives was so maligned, and also why it was considered a dead end, and why so many women were leaving the workforce. 1 in 10 women leave the workforce at the height of their careers, with all of that investment in them as professional human beings really wasted because they don't get the support they need during this transitory but sometimes very challenging phase. And that really made me start looking backwards again at all of the other things that impact on women's ability to work to their full capacity, whether it's periods, whether it's trying to get pregnant, whether it's having fertility treatment, whether it's endometriosis. There are so many aspects of our biology that are completely different from our male colleagues. And it's not a question of kind of patronizing and giving us handouts. It's a question of recognizing our incredible worth to the economy and then working out ways together in which to make it a more comfortable place for us to be. We started Menopause Mandate here in the UK and then very swiftly realised that actually, unbelievably, because things were pretty rock bottom here, that we were considered pioneering when it came to recognising the challenges that women face in midlife and onwards in their working lives. And I think that one of the aspects of the campaigning that I've really felt is incredibly important is this idea of not doing the fine-tuning. Fans on desks, very nice, a menopause, a patron that you can go to in your office, very nice. But actually there are really fundamental things that companies can do in order to facilitate their female workers. And the first and foremost one is making sure that women feel valued. And if you look at what happens with companies that, for example, have no women on their non-exec boards, you expect a 1.9% profit margin. If you have 30% women on your non-exec board, then it leaps up to 14%. So the economic encouragement is there, and actually it seems like very bad business to me not to recognize contributions like that. There are other aspects of women's working lives that I'd really like to see changed. I don't see why we don't have joint pensions, for example, which would in some way supplement and make up for the fact that women have these periods during their working lives where they may have to drop out and come back in. There's all kinds of positive things you can do in terms of reskilling women when they do come back to work, not just expecting them to sit down at their desk and pick up where they left off, maybe 6 months, maybe a year, maybe 5 years previously. Most importantly, I guess, it's recognizing that this isn't something that you're doing for charity to help poor women, but actually you're doing because it makes good business sense. At the moment, I'm doing a series of podcasts with CEOs of companies who are making big breakthroughs when it comes to training and retaining their female workforces, and every single one of them is running a really successful company that wouldn't have achieved the levels of success that they have if they hadn't gone about making things right for the female part of their workforce. I've also created and edited 2 anthologies. The first was called Desire, and it was a collection of erotica, 100 of literature's sexiest stories, because I think in a world where, sex is everywhere, quite frankly, and the proliferation of pornography has been one of the less impressive elements of the spread of the World Wide Web. There's a lot about women's sexuality that I think is unrecognized, and these were stories dating back 100, 150 years, right up to today, that in a way appeal and connect to women's sexuality. And that was the kicking off point in terms of wanting to put women back into history. There are so many big gaps in history where women are just entirely absent, but they weren't absent at the time. It's just that if you're not the people considered to be making history, you disappear from it. So the best example of that was the next anthology that I set about putting together, which was called Wild Women, and it was about female explorers and the incredible adventures that many women have embarked on, very much at a time for many of them where it was very difficult, even more difficult than it might be in some parts of the world today, to be solo travelers and to be doing these incredible things. And it just felt really important to me because I spent my 20s reading about male explorers. I was addicted to the travel bookshop in Notting Hill, later made famous in Richard Curtis's film of the same name. But all of the stories I read were by men. And I suddenly woke up one day thinking, did no women ever travel? Apart from maybe Freya Stark and Mary Wollstonecraft. So I started digging into writing by female explorers about their adventures and put together this anthology, which probably one of the favorite things I've ever done.